Chinese tech companies may get a temporary breather after Beijing relaxes the crackdown for a while, but not if Beijing says, hey, we will take ownership in your company. What could be the reason? Is China's economy at too much of a loss? What about the man-made COVID crisis and the lockdowns? I speak with Gordon Chang, Gatestone Institute Distinguished Senior Fellow and author of The Coming Collapse of China, on what's at stake of the China-U.S. relationship as China faces crisis on multiple fronts. Welcome to China Insider. I'm David Zhang. Top Chinese officials held 4 meetings in just 4 days in an attempt to map out the next steps of rescuing China's economy as the pandemic lockdowns continue in various degrees across major cities in China. But this isn't the only crisis. The close ties with Russia is forcing the world to distance itself from China, along with potential food shortages and supply chain redistribution. Seemingly inevitable decoupling is taking place. And Xi Jinping himself, the Chinese president, may not like where this is going. In his latest speech at the Boao Forum, an answer from China to the Davos Forum, Xi says, quote, "We need to work together to tackle global governance challenges. Countries around the world are like passengers aboard the same ship who share the same destiny. For the ship to navigate the storm and sail toward a bright future, all passengers must pull together. The thought of throwing anyone overboard is simply not acceptable." Along with it, Xi Jinping also emphasized the indivisible security community. So who is trying to throw China overboard, and why is Xi Jinping eager to emphasize we're in this together, on a ship? Is he pleading with the West? Gordon Chang writes his take on the situation in China amid the speech from Xi Jinping, and what crises China faces at the moment, and how it can impact the dangerous period of the U.S.-China relationship. Gordon Chang is the author of Coming Collapse of China and a distinguished senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute. Gordon Chang, thank you so much for joining us today on China Insider.
Thank you so much, David.
Gordon, when we look at in the recent speech he made at the Boao Forum, how much of this should be political and how much of that should be economic when it comes to reading his speech?
Everything that China does, of course, is political. But this specific speech was actually, I think, economic. And because Xi Jinping, when he talked about indivisible security, actually betrayed his greatest fear, and that is the world decoupling from China. And we saw a number of decoupling references, the word that Xi actually used. And really what he was saying was that the world should not throw China overboard, another term that he actually, in fact, used. Right now, the Chinese economy is in contraction, clearly on a month-to-month basis, both March and April, maybe even year to year. And this is really quite stunning because there really is no path out of this. We see these dynamic zero COVID lockdowns. China's not moving away from that policy. This is an attempt to deal with Omicron BA2, which no country can stop. And so China is determined to apply Mao Zedong's man over nature narrative, and it just isn't working.
Last week, we hear that China seems to want to stop its tech crackdown since last year. But I mean, how should we read into that? Is that going to be something permanent or just fit for the moment?
This, I believe, is just a momentary tactic. And we've also got to remember that although that Beijing may put a pause on the tech crackdown, it is nonetheless proceeding with its plans to take stakes in these large tech companies, these 1% ownership interests, which can easily expand to a greater percentage. But even if they don't expand, really what Beijing is doing is trying to exert control over them. So I think that when you step back and look at the totality of what Beijing is doing, we don't really see very much of a pause.
Xi Jinping likes to, quote unquote, make concessional speeches on foreign events or international stages, whereas his internal speeches are often more catered towards the party cagers. Should we interpret this speech as such?
I think that it is, first of all, concessional in a little bit of sense, but mostly it is Beijing's really warning to the world not to cut China off. But really, I don't think it's going to be very effective, largely because the world, for economic reasons, not political, not geopolitical, but for economic reasons, is doing that. For instance, we see companies starting to understand that globalization does not offer a secure path forward because the oceans and skies are not going to be a reliable means to transport goods. And it's not going to be a reliable means because China is supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that is accelerating a division of the international system. We're moving away from the post-Cold War era into something which looks really horrible. So, we've passed probably an historic inflection point, transitioning from a period of general calm into one of constant turbulence. And we can thank both the Russians and the Chinese for that.
The post-Ukraine situation now, people calling for this bipolar world order. Does this mean that because globalization had benefited China for so long, this is where China doesn't want to be?
This is not where China should want to be because China has benefited, been actually the biggest beneficiary of the American-sponsored period of globalization and integration of China into the international system. But companies, for many reasons, see that they need to locate production in various places. You can hear them move away from supply chains, that term, to supply webs. In other words, having alternate sources of production. That's not nearly as efficient, but resiliency is considered to be an important goal these days because of just the awful situation in the world. So this means that factories are going to continue to move from China. That pace will accelerate. And I think that we will find China to be the biggest victim of this period of deglobalization. But don't have too much sympathy for Beijing because Beijing has caused this through various means.
When Xi speaks of indivisible security, this decoupling process isn't actually on his terms. And so he's not in the preparation stage or prepared enough to handle the decoupling.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's not on China's terms. It's being driven by a number of things. But Xi Jinping is very much the author of this deglobalization. He's tried to push he's made life difficult for foreign companies in China. He's made life difficult for Chinese private entrepreneurs because he believes in a state-dominated system. He is trying to close China off from the rest of the world. His wolf warrior diplomacy has really shocked a number of people. And clearly his support for Russia in the Ukraine war has, I think, been the tipping point in opinion in companies and countries around the world. So he has started a process which he doesn't look like he wants to stop. And yet he wants the world to continue to support China. Well, it's one or the other. And Xi Jinping is being extremely unrealistic about it. That's because I think he's, first of all, ideologically driven, but also because he's unrealistic. He believes that China can continue to intimidate countries and companies. And that's looking less likely right now as we see a reassessment of China, a fundamental reassessment of China these days.